Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Go Farther series on the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. I am back. I am live. Well, you're listening to me recorded, but I am back. After a couple of weeks, you probably noticed some of the episodes were from the archives because it has been a busy couple of weeks. The last month or so has included a voluminous amount of travel for different client work that I've been doing. So because of travel schedules and everything else, something had to give. And so the good news is that we have tons of great episodes and content that I was able to ask Serena to pull from our archives and share with you as part of this Go Farther podcast. I'm excited to be back with you because we're kind of in this home stretch now of the Go Farther podcast series. When I developed the idea of this series back in January, the thought was to run this series through the spring and into the summer, and then that would conclude the Go Farther series. And then in the fall, I would pick up with a new series. And so from my notes and from my planning, I've got five episodes left in this Go Farther podcast series. So what I'd like to do is jump right into this episode of the Go Farther series. And this episode is Put Yourself First. Put your space self, capital S, put yourself first. So what do I mean by put yourself first? Well, obviously, if you're an entrepreneur, a founder, a parent, a partner, whatever you're doing in the world, and you're in this position where you're looking to do more, be happy and surprise yourself, you want to go farther, that probably means that every day is busy. You've got many responsibilities to other people. You have responsibilities to customers, you have responsibilities to team members and employees, responsibilities sometimes to investors. So that's all on the business side of things. Then, of course, you have responsibilities to your family, whether that's a partner, a spouse, kids, parents, extended family. Many of us at this time of year, right, you're taking travel and vacation. I know a lot of friends that are traveling across the country to spend a week with their parents. I'm doing the same in August, spending a week to go over to the East Coast to spend time with my parents and my sisters and their kids and all of those kinds of things. So we have those responsibilities. And because we're in the kind of position we're in, it's probably true that most of us have many other people depending on us. So customers depend on us, team members depend on us, investors depend on us, family members depend on us. And so there's a lot of other people pointing to us and looking to us and asking us to do a lot of stuff for them, and rightfully so. If we're in a position we can help them, then we should, and we could, and we do. Of course, the challenge and maybe the underlying frustration or even sometimes the fear I get is like, what about me? Like, when do I get time for me and my stuff and myself? If I wake up in the morning, the first thing I'm getting is requests for breakfast or requests for logins to the internet, and then I get requests, immediately when I open up my inbox or Slack channels or Teams accounts, you get all of these requests from other people. And then you've got a full day of meetings with clients or prospective customers or investors or team members. And then at the end, then the day is over, and then you get requests for dinner and soccer practice and all the other things. And let's watch a TV show or let's play chess or whatever it is. Right. At the end of the day, it's like, well, what about me? Like, what about my time? And so where we want to be with this idea of put yourself, capital S, first, is we want to make time for our priorities just as much as we're making time for other people's priorities. We certainly want to make sure that we know that our plan is actually getting executed, our personal plan, whether that's a fitness plan, a personal health plan, a work plan that you're doing at the business, or a life plan that you're planning out with your partner. And we also want to make sure that we're moving that plan forward because we know that plan is going to help other people around us. And at the end of the day, where we want to be is to be our best self. That's where you can do more, be happy, and surprise yourself, where you can go farther. And so just like every other episode, I've got a couple examples from my ultra running and training routines and various exploits that I've done over the years. I want to share some of those examples, and then also want to share some examples from work. And then we'll dig into 5 specific strategies to help you put this concept of put yourself first to work. All right, let's dig in with trail running. So when I talk about put yourself first, for me, like, exercise is always important, and exercise is something that I do every day, regardless of whether or not I have a a big race coming up, or, in some cases, a jujitsu tournament or something like that, I'm going to go to jujitsu class. I'm going to go exercise. I'm going to do things to make myself better physically, mentally, emotionally. However, I've also found that when I have an end goal, and many people I talk to, whether it's, a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon, a marathon kind of race that they have signed up for, most people I talk to, they're like, oh, I'm always this a little bit more focused. I'm always a little bit more, put in a little more effort. I always do a little bit better when I have that goal race or I've got that end objective. And I'm no different, right? So for me, over the last couple of years, while I've pared back on the number of huge ultra marathons I'm doing, I've still, over the last year, decided to continue and pick up doing some ultra running. So last fall, I did 100K, which is, roughly 63 miles, an ultra marathon over in Sonoma. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to set, any kind of personal record, or it was that, I was just missing running so much that I couldn't wait to get back on the trail. Most of all, for me, around the spring of last year, I realized I needed something to kind of push me physically, emotionally, like help me structure my days a little bit better. And while I did miss the trail and I did miss running, and I wanted to continue that part of my personal life, it was really just knowing that when I have a goal race in mind, in this case, I signed up for the race in May for a race that was in October. I just knew I would be performing better all around. And so this year I've done the same, right? I set out a goal race in July that I'm going to be doing and signed up for that race way back in January. And my entire exercise routine and my training has really been structured around pointing towards that race in July. So the first thing about putting yourself first is that by scheduling and signing up for that race, what that forces you then to do, of course, is to work backwards and say, well, if I'm going to be prepared for that 10K that I'm going to run, or a half marathon, or in my case, an ultra marathon, then I've got to start thinking through, how am I going to structure my days, my weeks, my months, such that I can make sure that I'm prepared to execute on that goal. And so this race, just like last year, there's no huge time goals or personal records I'm looking to set. I certainly want to have a good race. I want to have a strong race. I want to finish the race in a certain time so that I can qualify for a future Western States lottery, should I want to do that race in the future. But at the end of the day, like, first of all, just registering for that race and then using that as a forcing function to make sure I'm putting in the hard training I'm going to need is really leading up to that race, has really been just something that's been really important to me as an outlet, a way to put myself first, because nobody else can do the training for me. Nobody else can go out and do the trail runs for me. And many times those trail runs are alone, like getting up at, whether it's early morning on Wednesdays or on the weekends, doing long trail runs, or during the day, taking a break from work. Those are mostly things I have to do on my own. And those are the things I look forward to, because by doing those things on my own, it's a way of putting myself first. If I'm taking a break in the middle of the day between, if I got a 2 hour block between calls at noon and calls at 2:30, and I'm going to say, look, I've been working hard. I've been getting up at 4 in the morning. It's now noon. I could use a break, and I'm going to put myself first. I'm going to go exercise and be unapologetic about not working in that hour and a half, where I'm going to go out and do a 5, 6 mile run and then come back and shower and get rested, recover, have some lunch, and then be ready to go for the rest of the afternoon. A second example of trail running that is like an idea of putting yourself first is around this idea of scheduling everything. So schedule everything is something I covered in detail back in episode 9. It's called Schedule Everything. And putting yourself first means that, for me, when I'm planning out at various timelines, so every morning I plan out, I look at my day. What are the calls that I have? Is the day, am I double booked? Did I make sure I have time for exercise? How am I feeling that day? Maybe I planned out to do a longer 10-mile run, but maybe that day I'm feeling a little sore from the weekend, and maybe I'm going to scale it back to 5 miles, or maybe I'm going to shift that over and do some weight training or do some swimming instead. So I'm doing the daily planning, which I've talked about. I'm also doing weekly planning. So most Sunday afternoons, I'll sit down, look at the week ahead, and say, okay, when do I have time blocks during the day, in those work hours from, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. or 5 p.m.? When can I find those 1 hour, 1.5 hour time blocks to do some short runs or do some ways to do my training? And what do the weekends look like? So the following Saturday, if it's Sunday now, I'm looking ahead to the following Saturday or the following Sunday and saying, okay, finding out for my wife, what are the things that you have planned for next weekend so we can balance. If you're planning to be at the barn all day Saturday and you're going to be there early in the morning, and I was thinking about doing a trail run, well, something not going to work there, right? So we have to plan that out. And I need to know before I just go and decide to go do a long trail run and be gone all day Saturday, did she have something else planned? And so by scheduling everything and adding all of those things to my weekly schedule, and then ultimately a monthly or even quarterly schedule, those are ways for me to know, regardless of everything else that's going to happen around me, regardless of my work stuff, the things that my wife wants to do around her work or around the hobbies that she has, I know that I'm going to be able to make that time to schedule and have that training block, those training blocks I'm going to need in order to be ready for that big goal race, which is an accomplishment when I finish that it will make me feel good and make me feel like I've done something for myself in the midst of all of the other things I'm doing for other people all of the time. The last thing that I found in terms of my training that has been really helpful for me that I want to share with you, and like everything, as I've said over and over and over, these are just things that have worked for me, things that I've learned over the years from other people, or things that I've adapted from things that I've learned. And so, just like everything here, if there's something here directly that works for you, just adopt it or adapt it to your situation, right? And so the last thing that I found works really well for me is the concept of yes and. Yes and. So this is something I talk about with clients all the time in sales. The idea of yes and is when someone tells you something and you need to change direction or do something else first, the concept of yes and says, yes, I receive what you're saying. I receive what you're giving to me, and I want to build on top of this. It's a technique from improv comedy, where if you're doing improv, someone else on stage will set a scene and then throw it to you, and your job is to say yes to what they give you and build on top of it. That's different than saying but, or I can't, or no. So if I'm doing improv on stage and somebody sets the scene and throws it to me and I don't like what they've done and I change it to make it what I want, then I'm rejecting the whole concept of improv, which is going with the flow and building on top of a story. Why is that important here? Well, it's important because when we think about the day and your normal day, I'm sure there are lots of interruptions, or despite how much you're trying to build up a schedule that includes time for your capital S self, there are requests that come in, like we've talked about. And so I found that using yes and has worked really well for me. So here's a really quick example. So right now it's summertime. My son's going to summer camps usually for about half the day, sometimes into the mid afternoon. And I'm usually the one that works from home. My wife goes to the office on campus. And so when he gets home, there's usually, let's get some lunch or at least a snack or something, because I know you're going to be hungry. You've been out doing stuff all day. And then dinner time might roll around and I've been working all day, and maybe I have planned to do my exercise. Maybe I've planned to do some weight training in the afternoon from 4 to 5 o'clock, or do a run from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock because it's the end of the day and that's the best 1 hour block that I have to go do a run. Well, there are times where my son is like, "Hey, I'm kind of hungry for dinner early. Can we have dinner?" And it's 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I'm about to go walk into the garage, or I'm about to go out for that 5 or 6 mile run. The one thing I want to do as a parent is say, "Yeah, like let's get you dinner. Like let's do it, right? If you're hungry, you want to eat, let's get you dinner." But there's also a part of me that says, "Look, I mean, if I'm planning to do a 30-minute weight training session in the garage, or I'm planning to do a 1 hour run, I know my son's not going to starve to death." So the idea of yes and is to say, yeah, happy to get you dinner. I was just about to go into the garage to lift some weights. It's going to take me about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. Can you wait, an hour before dinner? It's 4:30 now. What if we started dinner at 5:30? Is that going to work for you? Are you that malnourished that you need food now? And like every single time, he's like, no, that's cool. And if he's really that hungry, say, look, why don't we just go grab an apple, go grab a snack, go grab something to hold you over. And then after I do my workout, then I will make you dinner. So it's yes and. It's a very simple yet effective protective mechanism to make sure that when you have those things scheduled, that you are making the time and keeping to that time that you have set aside for yourself. I do this during the day with work stuff. If I blocked out time on my calendar to do a run from 1 to 2:30, got my call at noon, wraps up at 12:30, 12:45. I'm going to change. I'm going to go for a run from 1 to 2, get back, clean up, have some lunch, get back in the office by 2:30. There are times where somebody may request in the morning, I might get an email like, hey, I know we're supposed to meet at 10 this morning. Can you meet, instead at 1 o'clock? I'm like, okay, well, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I've got that time set aside to do exercise, right? And so I will, and Serena, my assistant, knows to do this. She will say, yes, we can certainly move the 10 o'clock meeting. What if do other times work for you today other than 1 o'clock? Can you do 2 o'clock? Can you do 4 o'clock? What about 11? What about if we did it tomorrow or Thursday? And she will look for 3 or 4 other options to present to that person. And unless it's like, a level 10 emergency, then DEFCON 5 kind of thing, then almost always that person will go, oh, sure, 3 o'clock works just as well as 1 o'clock. No worries, let's do it. And so this is what allows me to protect my training time, because if instead I go, oh, sure, let's just move it to 1, and then I move my exercise block from 1 to 3. And then maybe something else pops up at 3. And then maybe something else pops up. And now all of a sudden, while I was planning to do a 5 or 6 or 7 mile run, now that time is gone. And I don't have that full hour and a half that I thought I was going to have. And so this concept of yes and can be really effective to protect that time. And I use it all the time to protect my training time, to make sure that I do all the things I need to do that build and build and build and build up to the ability to run 100K ultramarathon. So those are just a couple examples from my trail running and endurance training on how you can make sure you're putting yourself, capital S, first. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode and many episodes here on the Startup Selling Show, and especially the Go Farther series that we're running right now. I want to remind you to please do me a favor. As you can tell, put a lot of time and effort into this content, and I love getting feedback from friends, people on LinkedIn, people that like and comment on posts or send me DMs. I got a text yesterday from a friend who told me that he was on my LinkedIn page catching up on posts because he'd been traveling and missed it. It just made me feel good. He's a personal friend, and good to know that other people besides just the business world are listening and checking out the content. And so it's helpful for me and helpful for other people like you. Number one, you can like or comment on the posts that you see about this episode. Number two, if you're not already following the show, please do follow the show so that the new episodes that we keep pumping out pop up on your feed. Make it part of your routine to listen to the show on a dog walk or while you're doing food shopping, or maybe you're in the car doing a commute. And number three, please leave a review and tell a friend. The reviews are so helpful on these different podcast players because it helps to promote the episodes. It knows the podcast players should be promoting this if they're seeing positive reviews to other people just like you. And telling a friend is still the best way for podcasts to grow. Most of the podcasts I listen to come from people recommending them to me, like, oh, hey, you should check out this history podcast, or hey, you should check out this podcast because I think you really like some of the content that's there. And so I'll check it out, listen to an episode, and before I know it, I'm following the show and making it part of my podcast listening routine. So please do tell a friend, please do follow the show, leave a review, and tell us how we're doing. So I appreciate you listening. It means a lot to me that someone out there is gaining benefit from what I'm sharing here, that the learnings I've had are helpful to other folks. And thanks for listening. Now, let's look at some work examples, putting yourself first. Some of these I've talked about before. It's a good reminder in case you missed the other episodes where I've discussed these, or first time you're hearing them. So a couple examples are, for me, in the business, in my work that I do every day, one of the things that is my self time is creating content. This is the thing I enjoy doing the most. This is the thing that's kind of my personal genius zone. I'm not the best person in the world, but it's the thing I enjoy doing the best. It's the thing I do the best here at our company. It's effective for me. It's effective for our clients. It's effective for bringing in new clients. And so one of the concepts here, putting myself first, is while I'm creating content like this podcast or blog posts or LinkedIn posts or writing books, while that's for other people, it's for clients, it's for prospects, it's for marketing, it's really also for me. Like selfishly, I love getting up and doing content creation before I jump into email or Slack or Teams or do Zoom calls first thing in the morning. I love going in and doing this. It's fulfilling to me. It's enjoying to me. I get lost in the time in which I'm doing it. If I'm doing a podcast episode and preparing for it, or if I'm writing out a LinkedIn post, or I'm working on a chapter in a book, that's the time in which I lose track of time. I can easily go 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours and realize like, wow, I've been working on this for 2 hours. And I enjoy it. And so I have to protect that time. So the idea of putting myself first is something I've talked about where I put large blocks of time in my calendar that is protected, that Serena knows not to book meetings. Our public calendars on Calendly do not make me available for these times so that I can not only deliver this content for you, but I can also selfishly create it for me because it's something that I enjoy doing. It brings me joy and it brings me energy. Another example of putting myself first is delegating. So when you're at work, I think it's easy for all of us to feel like, oh, I've got to do this thing, or I'm the best at doing this task, or it's going to take me too long to train somebody else. I can do it in 5 minutes. It's going to take someone else on my team 30 minutes to do it. So I'll just do it myself. Well, that's not executive level thinking. And that's certainly not putting yourself first, because even though it's for you, it's only a 5 minute task. A 5 minute task will really probably cost you 15 or 20 minutes because of task switching. And most of all, you're not getting out of your own way. And so when I talk about putting yourself first, you've got to make sure as an executive, as a leader, as a contributor at your company, that you are putting yourself in a position to do your best work. And what that means is that you have to learn how to delegate things out. So in recent episodes of this podcast, which I referred to at the beginning of this episode, the last couple of episodes we pulled from archives. You've even listened to Serena do an introduction. And that was me saying to her, look, I'm traveling. I'm not going to be able to record a fresh episode. What I'd like for you to do, this is not me doing it. Hey, I want you to go through our archives of hundreds of episodes we've done over the last 10 years. Find 2 or 3 episodes that you would recommend that we can pull that would work really well with this Go Farther podcast series, and then make that recommendation to me. Which of these episodes do you think that we could use this week? And she did exactly that. So once she recommended that, the first one was the episode with that we did recently, which was around like, why do we do this? I think this is 2 episodes ago. Why do we do this? That was something I recorded way back in 2018 or 2019. So she recommended that episode. And in addition, right, while I was traveling, I literally did not feel like I was going to be able to make the time to sit down and do an introduction to that episode. So what do? Hey, Serena, why don't you record the intro? You're the podcast producer. You're the one that knows this episode. Why don't you do it? And so again, by delegating that out, it also gave her the ability to improve her skills. She told me she was very nervous and also really excited to be able to do that. So it helps up level her. And now I know if ever I need to do that again, I can say, hey, Serena, go find an episode from the archive, do the intro, and I don't have to worry about it. So that's putting myself first by learning how to delegate that stuff out. The last thing I'll say around this work side of putting yourself first comes down to planning. And I've talked over and over about schedule everything, do your planning. I talked about in this episode the morning planning I do for every day, the weekly planning I do for the week ahead, the monthly and quarterly planning. It's really critical that you look at this time as self time. You've got to be able to reset for your day, preview what's ahead, get mentally prepared, make sure you're blocking out the time, be unapologetic about taking large blocks of time every month or every quarter to plan out your month, plan out your quarter, look ahead to the rest of the year. This is something I started doing over the last week, is starting to think through what is the second half of 2024 going to look like. I've started blocking out on my calendar what conferences I know I'm going to be going to in September, October, November. I've been blocking out certain schedules to do podcast recording for the next series of podcasts that we're going to be doing into the fall. I've been thinking through the personal time that I'm going to be spending. What is there a jujitsu tournament that I want to do? Yes, there is. Well, I'm going to need to start blocking out the time to train for that tournament. Am I thinking about doing another trail run in the fall? Maybe, maybe not, but at least I want to start thinking about those things. I can't wake up in October and decide, oh, I'm going to do another trail run this year. It's going to be too late. So be unapologetic. Put yourself first when it comes to planning those things out and creating the time, making the time to do that planning. Because if you don't set aside time aside, then it's not going to get done. So, giving you some examples from trail running, giving you some examples from work, let's talk about 5 specific strategies to help you put yourself first so that you can do more, be happy, and surprise yourself. Okay. Number 1, say no to requests and opportunities. Say no. Got to learn how to say no. If you're going to put yourself first, you got to learn how to say no. This is always hard because for me personally, I like to help people. I like to say yes to opportunities that come my way. And I also have to learn how to say no. So as a couple of examples, just in the last couple of weeks, I was invited to teach a paid workshop down at Plug and Play. They had a big summit in every June. I've been working with Plug and Play for, I think, 5 years now, probably run dozens of workshops and webinars for them over the years. And they asked me, look, we've got this international group coming in and they're going to be there all day on Tuesday. Can you come down and do a workshop to teach them sales? And now I was already planning to be at the summit that they were running on Wednesday and Thursday. And that Tuesday was going to be a pretty important day for me. One, because I needed to stack up some meetings since I was going to be out of the office. And two, I knew I needed that time to set meetings and be prepared for Wednesday and Thursday. And while it's always hard to turn down money, I just looked at the opportunity cost of my time and said, like, as much as I want to do that workshop, and it's easy because I've done that workshop, 100 times, and they're going to pay me to do it, I had to say no because it was the only way I was going to be able to be my best self and get the most out of that Wednesday and Thursday at the summit on behalf of the client. So that's one example of saying no. Another example is I actually agreed to do a webinar for an accelerator group. This is something I was going to do pro bono and a webinar I've done for this group over the years a couple of times. And I just looked at my calendar. We had it set for late in June. And I looked at my calendar at the early part of this month, looking ahead as part of my planning and said, I can't do it. I know I told them yes, and I just can't. And I wrote them a very apologetic and very specific email and said, here's why I can't do it. I'm happy to look at doing it in August or September. Right now in June, given the crunch that I have with client responsibilities and the fact that I'm going to be out for 2 weeks in July, I just, while it's only a 90-minute webinar, it's really half a day for me because it's the preparation, it's running the webinar, it's the post webinar wind down and the switching cost. That 90 minutes on a 9 o'clock on Thursday really means that entire Thursday morning is gone. And if I look at the 2 weeks in the second half of June and I break out my days and say I've got 5 work days per week and I block those into mornings and afternoons, that's only 20 time blocks that I have between mid-June and end of quarter. And those 20 time blocks become very valuable to me. And when some of those time blocks are being taken with travel, being taken with conferences, being with events, now those 20 time blocks are really only about 6 or 7 big time blocks of time. And now all of a sudden I realize, like, man, 1 out of 7 of those time blocks are going to be taken doing this webinar. It's just too expensive for me right now. And so I had to say no to something I had already said yes to. And of course I feel bad. And of course I wish I wouldn't have said yes to that when I did, because now it's setting up for disappointment. The thing that was magical was the reply I got, which was like, oh, of course, no problem. Absolutely, totally get it. Thanks so much for even considering doing this webinar for us pro bono. We'll definitely look at doing it in August. We'll be in touch then. So they were just awesome about it. And so because I was able to explain to them why I couldn't do it in a very concise way, and because I had a good relationship to them, saying no was good for me and it didn't affect the relationship at all. So you'd be surprised, as long as you say no the right way, how oftentimes people will be understanding. And if they're not understanding, you should kind of question whether or not that's the right partner or right situation for you. So that's my number 1 strategy, say no. Number 2, make time. You're going to have to make time. If you're going to put yourself, capital S first, make time. What that means is exercise. Maybe that means getting up early, 30 minutes earlier than you normally would, or an hour earlier, and getting in that 3-mile jog in the morning, or going out to your garage and doing your workout. Or maybe that means making time is like, look, say yes and to the request for dinner. Like, yes, we're going to do dinner, but we're going to do dinner at 6 o'clock, not 5 o'clock, because I want to go do this workout. I need to do this for myself. I planned out this workout for myself today. This is what I'm going to do. It means making time in the middle of the day. If you have that 2-hour block, if you're planning out your days and your weeks and you see you've got some white space in your calendar, if it's middle of the day, the chances are your brain might be a little mushy anyway. If you get up early like I do by 12 noon, been up for 8 hours. Like I can't work hard for 16 hours a day. I'm going to have ebbs and flows. My energy is going to be low. So one of the best ways for me to get better energy is to go out and exercise. I get the endorphins flowing, I get the positive chemicals flowing, I get oxygen moving through my brain, and that refreshes me for the second half of the day. So find ways to make time so you can put yourself first. Strategy number three, communicate. Communicate to your team, communicate to your partners, your kids, your families, that the things that you're doing are important and why they're important to them. Fortunately, I've got an unbelievably supportive wife when it comes to my training and when it comes to my work. And as long as I communicate with her ahead of time, like, hey, next Saturday, Katie and Kelly, two of my good friends, I haven't seen them all year for training because our schedules haven't lined up. They're both going to be going out to Auburn. They're going on a trail run. You said you were also planning to go to the barn. Like, can we make this work? And easily enough, she's like, yeah, I wasn't planning to go to the barn until about 11:30 or 12. So great, works for me. I get up at 5, go do my trail run. I'm home at 12:30, 1 o'clock. Makes it easy for my wife, makes it easy for my son, and makes it easy for me to go ahead and get the things done that I want to do and need to do in order to train for this race. Right. So it's simple communication because I'd done that planning ahead of time. The other place this really works for me, and again, where I have just really wonderful support, is when we're out doing stuff with other families. So a couple weekends ago, we went camping out the coast with a whole big group of friends. And, nighttime's fun. You get the campfire going and people hanging out, having conversation, having some beer, having some wine. And for me, I'm in training mode, right? And it's like 8:30, 9 o'clock is rolling around. And for me, it's bedtime, right? And even though now it's getting later in the day, it's still a little bit light out. I'm like, look, I know we're going to be hanging out, but 9 o'clock is probably about when I'm going to call it a day. I'm not planning to drink. I'm not going to have any beer. I'm not going to have any alcohol at 9 o'clock. I'm going to shut it down. So while there's a huge group of people, 12 people around a campfire, it's 9 o'clock and they might just be getting going. I'm like, hey guys, it's time for me to go. I got to get some rest because in the morning, I'm going to get up and do a 10-mile run here in the hills. And my friends understand, my wife understands, but just being able to communicate that is something that's really important. To let the people know what you're doing for you is important, and for them to know it's important to you. So that's the third. Third is to communicate. Fourth strategy, be flexible. Be flexible. It's not just always about you, right? It's about the other people around you, whether it's teammates at work, clients, prospects. Sometimes it is a level 5, DEFCON 5 kind of thing. And that meeting, that call needs to happen at 1 o'clock, not at 10 o'clock. Like we've got to have this meeting today because the client has an investor meeting tomorrow, or because the client has a huge sales call tomorrow with a big bank and they need that help preparing. Tomorrow's not going to work. It's got to be today. It's okay to be flexible. If there's a situation that pops up, this happened last week. My wife came back from work and she said, hey, I just got invited to go up flying in a Seminole. She hadn't been flying in a while. She's like, is it cool if I go? Even though I had planned to do some other stuff during that time. I'm like, yeah, just go, right? Be flexible. I can move my stuff around. It's not a big deal. So yeah, I schedule everything and I try to be rigid. I try to be disciplined to that schedule. But then there's times where, not just you need to put yourself first, but you have to let other people put themselves first. And I knew that was something important. It was going to be something fun. It was one of those emergent opportunities that I talked about in the past, being deliberately emergent. And I wanted my wife to experience that joy. So it's easy for me to say yes when you have a bit of flexibility in your mindset. And then the last thing that I'll mention as a strategy is to look for ways to kind of mix things together. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of multitasking, but there are certainly opportunities where you can look at a situation and say, wow, that's cool. And that also could avail me to something else. So, example I just mentioned is camping. So, we're going to be out, we were out camping on the coast. I love running in the coast because, first of all, it's not 100 degrees. Secondly, there's lots of hills. And thirdly, there's just different kinds of trails, different geography. You get up on top of a ridge, you can see the ocean, lots of big grassy areas as opposed to forest. And it's just a new place to run. I love going to new trails. So I looked at that opportunity and go camping. I'm like, well, part of me is like, yeah, I want to go camping. And I also have all this training I got to do. Well, what if we just merge the two? Yeah, let's go camping and let me look for some trails that are near the campsite that I can go explore. We're going to manage the time so that, yeah, I'm going to hang out till about 9 o'clock, but then I'm also going to get up early at 6, go and do the run so that I'm back by 8:30 when everyone else is just getting going in the morning. So my time isn't impeding into the other rest of the family time and the friend time that we had camping. So it's a way to actually mix things together. It's a version of yes and. Yes, let's go camping and let me figure out how to way to integrate in training to that. Later today, like, hey, my son and his friend probably going to want to go to the pool. He hasn't seen his friend in about a week because his friend was away. My son has his camp. His friend has another camp. So this afternoon, late afternoon, 4 o'clock, hey, why don't I take you swimming down to the pool? And while we're there, I can get some laps in because I know that they're going to be fine and they're going to be safe and they can take care of themselves. They both know how to swim. There's other people around. I can keep an eye on them while I'm doing laps. Everything's cool. So they get to do the things they want to do, go to the pool. It's going to be good for him because he's going to get good and tired by swimming. And it's good for me because I can mix in some different training and make sure I'm getting my exercise in. So mix things together when you can. So those are my 5 strategies. Say no to requests. Number 2, make time. Number 3, communicate. Number 4, be flexible. Number 5, mix things together when you can. So that's it. Put yourself, capital S, first so that you can do more. Be happy and surprise yourself. Go farther.